filled with the galaxy's most dangerous species. Giants with claws, creatures that breathe fire, minds that bend metal. At the center, one human woman sits silently. No weapons, no armor, just calm. When the strongest being in the room lifts her ambassador by the throat, she stands. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move fast. But in 12 seconds of silence, she makes a predator back down. Not with force, but with presence. This isn't just diplomacy. This is power you never see coming. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The Interstellar Species Profiling Office, known by most as the ISPO, was not the most glamorous department in the Galactic Confederation. Hidden deep within a maze of metal corridors and glowing control panels, the ISPO was a quiet place filled with endless digital forms, data streams, and tired analysts who spent their days labeling species. Every intelligent creature the Confederation came across had to be classified. It was law. These labels decided everything: what rights a species had, which trade zones they could enter, and even which restrooms they were allowed to use at Confederation headquarters. The classifications were simple on the surface: apex predator, advanced hunter, general omnivore, herbivore specialist, and at the very bottom, prey species. These categories weren't based on culture or technology. The ISPO didn't care how kind a species was, how many books they wrote, or whether they had poetry or philosophy. The only thing that mattered was biology: teeth, claws, venom, muscle density, and threat behavior. And by those standards, no one questioned the top spot held by the Rorok. The Rorok were legendary. Towering 9 feet tall with armored scales that shifted in color depending on their mood, they were born to dominate. Their claws could tear through metal, and their blood carried toxins that killed smaller creatures in seconds. They were classified as AP1, Apex Predator Class 1, the highest possible rating. The Rorok knew this and made sure everyone else knew it too. When they walked into a room, other species stepped aside. When they spoke, no one dared interrupt. Humans, on the other hand, were a different story. According to the ISPO, humans were adaptive foragers, subclass 9, which translated to mostly harmless. They had no natural weapons, no venom, no sharp claws or teeth. Their skin was soft and easily damaged. The official report even noted that humans cried when emotionally overwhelmed, a behavior that didn't inspire much respect among warlike species. But the ISPO had reluctantly upgraded them over the years due to their rapid development in technology, strategy, and unpredictable decision-making. Still, to most species in the galaxy, humans were just clever little creatures who got lucky. None of this mattered to Mila Wren. At least, that's what she told herself as she walked down the long corridor toward the conference room on Unity Station. The station floated in neutral space and served as the primary meeting place for interspecies diplomacy. It was built to impress, with glass floors overlooking the stars and tall archways designed to accommodate creatures of all shapes and sizes. Mila didn't notice any of that. She had been on too many space stations to care about pretty lights or shiny metal. Her mind was focused, quiet. Mila looked like she belonged in the background. That was intentional. She wore a plain gray diplomatic uniform and carried a small data tablet. Her dark hair was tied back in a low knot, and her eyes rarely made direct contact with anyone. She looked like a clerk, an assistant, maybe a translator. Nothing special. But she was far more than that. The official human delegation to the summit consisted of Ambassador Jalen Morrow and 2 staff members. Jalen was experienced, well-liked, and known for his calm demeanor under pressure. The other staffer was a trade analyst. Mila was listed as a junior assistant. She had no speaking role, no vote, and no authority to negotiate. Most of the other species ignored her entirely. That was the plan. Mila had served 8 years in planetary survival training and 5 more in human security strategy before being transferred to diplomatic support. Her job was simple: assess threats, observe body language, identify triggers, and step in if things went bad. And if they did go bad, she had full authority, granted quietly by Earth's Global Council, to take whatever actions were necessary to extract the human delegation safely. No one in the room, not even Jalen, knew just how trained Mila was, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Inside the chamber, delegates from 52 species had gathered. Some floated, others buzzed, slithered, or clicked. Holographic translators glowed above their seats, converting strange sounds into galactic standard speech. Every species had something at stake in the summit: trade rights, colonization zones, energy borders. But everyone in the room knew one thing: this summit would not go smoothly. The Rorak had made that clear from the start. They entered with full ceremonial force. General Corandal led them, gold and red scales gleaming under the ceiling lights, heavy armor clinking with each step. His expression was unreadable, but his presence spoke louder than words. His guards flanked him, massive and silent. They took their seats. The room fell into a heavy silence, as if oxygen itself had thinned. Mila sat behind Jalen and said nothing. She lowered her eyes, let her shoulders slump slightly, and made herself small. No one gave her a second glance. That, too, was exactly what she wanted. She watched as the talks began, as words were exchanged, as the careful dance of diplomacy moved slowly forward. But she saw more than that. She noticed the flex in a Rorak soldier's jaw, the way another kept tapping his claw. She noticed the hidden tension, the dangerous signs. And though her face stayed calm, a quiet thought settled in her mind. This wasn't going to end in words. The negotiations at Unity Station had begun just like any other high-stakes summit, slow, polite, and tense. Each species took their turn to speak, their voices translated by glowing orbs that hovered over the dong table. The room, designed to impress and intimidate, was tall and cold, filled with metallic surfaces and glowing panels. But beneath all the diplomacy and ceremony, something dangerous stirred. General Corandal, leader of the Rorak delegation, sat at the far end of the table like a coiled storm. He said little at first, letting his sharp eyes scan the room, while his guards stood behind him like statues. The Rorak were not known for patience, and everyone in the chamber felt the weight of their presence. Each time another species spoke, Dahl's claws tapped softly on the metal table, a rhythm that seemed harmless to most. But Mila Wren, sitting quietly behind the human ambassador, recognized it. It was a war rhythm, a cultural signal the Rorak used when preparing for combat. Ambassador Jalen Morrow had opened with careful words, reaffirming Earth's willingness to cooperate. He spoke slowly, calmly, with the practiced tone of a man who had spent his life talking people down from the edge. He explained Earth's legal right to expand into the border systems, citing Confederation laws and peaceful intentions. But Mila could tell from the beginning that the Rorak weren't interested in law. General Dahl finally leaned forward, his voice a low growl translated into standard speech by the floating orb. He accused the humans of breaking ancient customs, of stepping on territories the Rorak had hunted for generations. "You seek minerals," he said, "but you trespass on blood-soaked ground." Jalen remained composed. "With respect, General," he replied, "our surveys confirm those systems are uninhabited and fall under open colonization agreements." Dahl's scales shifted from gold to deep red. The Rorak guards twitched slightly, claws unsheathing and retracting again. Mila noted the small signs, the way one of the guards adjusted his stance, the way another scanned the exits. She made a mental list of potential threats, tracking each movement with quiet precision. The room grew colder. Other species tried to speak, offering compromises, suggesting shared rights or neutral oversight. One delegate, a tall creature in a bubbling suit of gas, offered a proposal that seemed fair, until Mila noticed a symbol on its shoulder. The logo matched a known Rorak ally. She quickly tapped a silent message to Jalen's display. "Conflict of interest." "Don't agree," Jalen adjusted smoothly. "We appreciate the offer," he said, "but perhaps a more neutral species could serve as mediator." The discussion dragged on, each moment tighter than the last. Voices rose. Some species began to argue among themselves. The translation system struggled to keep up, jumbling words, twisting meanings. Accidental insults turned into real ones. The air in the chamber grew heavy. Mila stayed still. She did not speak. But her mind worked quickly, watching for the moment she feared would come. Her job was to act only when things reached the point of no return. And they were getting close. The tension reached a new level when General Dahl slammed a clawed hand on the table. The sound cracked through the room louder than any translator could buffer. He stood to his full height, towering over everyone. His scales flared crimson. "You hide behind your rules," he said, voice rough with anger. "But your weakness is clear. You send a speaker with no real authority and a girl who hasn't spoken a word." He pointed one clawed finger at Mila. "Is she your decoration, an insult? Or do you hide your fear behind silence?" Jalen stood slowly, hands raised in peace. "Let's pause here," he said. "A short recess might give us a better path forward." But that was a mistake. Dahl's eyes narrowed. To him, standing now meant challenge, threat. He moved fast, far faster than his size suggested. In one sharp motion, he flipped the negotiation table, scattering devices and documents across the floor, and then he reached for Jalen. Mila stood up. No one noticed at first. All eyes were on Dahl as he lifted the ambassador off the ground, claws tight around Jalen's collar. The other delegates shouted. Security hesitated, unsure of the protocol. No one wanted to strike first. But Mila moved forward with calm, controlled steps. No weapons, no raised voice, just steady movement. She didn't shout or demand. She simply walked to within a few steps of the general, lifted her eyes to meet his, and held her ground. The room fell silent. Dahl looked at her. For a full 12 seconds, she said nothing. No expression, no fear, just stillness. Her eyes locked on his, unblinking. He stared back, and then, slowly, his claws loosened. He lowered Jalen to the ground. The ambassador coughed, shaken but alive. The general stepped back, uncertain. Mila turned and walked back to her seat. No one knew what had just happened, but every being in that room felt it. Something had shifted. Something no label, no classification could explain. And no one would underestimate her again. The room remained still, as if time itself had paused. The table lay shattered on the floor. Translation devices blinked in confusion, and the delegates, some with claws, some with tendrils, some with glowing eyes, watched in complete silence. No one moved. Even General Corin Dahl, still towering and dangerous, looked unsettled. He hadn't expected the human woman to step forward. He hadn't expected her to do nothing and yet change everything. Mila Wren sat back down in her chair as if nothing unusual had happened. She smoothed the edges of her tunic and folded her hands on the table, calm and steady. Her expression hadn't changed since she stood up. It wasn't pride or anger. It wasn't fear. It was quiet awareness. That expression said she had seen worse than this, much worse, and survived it. Jalen Morrow was shaken but recovering. He straightened his uniform and nodded toward Mila, just slightly, not even fully understanding what she had done. But he trusted her even if he didn't know why. The rest of the room didn't trust her yet. They didn't know what she was. But they were starting to wonder. The guards near the wall, neutral species trained to keep peace, began moving again, slowly and carefully. No one wanted to provoke the Rorach further, yet even General Dahl had stepped back. He had dropped his hold on the ambassador not because he was ordered to, but because something inside him had warned him to stop. The Rorach did not respect words. They respected strength. They respected fearlessness. But what Mila had shown wasn't strength in the usual sense. It wasn't a show of power. It was something deeper. The Rorach had no word for it, not exactly, but they understood it when they saw it. It was the kind of control that came from knowing exactly when not to act. Dahl had looked into her eyes and seen no challenge, but he had also seen no fear. That confused him more than rage ever could. The remaining delegates struggled to return the conversation to diplomacy. They repaired what little structure was left of the agenda. A new table was brought in, notes were reshuffled. Someone suggested a change of venue, but the idea was rejected. No one wanted to show weakness now, not after what had just happened. The summit continued, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Mila stayed silent. She made no speeches. She offered no explanation. Her datapad remained on her lap, untouched, but her silence now carried weight. Every glance sent her way was a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. What kind of human was she? What training did she have? And why had she not been introduced as a security officer or specialist? Because that wasn't her role. Not officially. Mila had been trained in human environments so extreme, so unstable, that standing in front of an armed alien giant didn't rattle her. Her experience wasn't printed on a badge. It didn't need to be. Survival taught her how to read danger, how to act with precision, and how to see when an enemy was about to tip over the edge. She knew how far to push, and more importantly, when to stop. As the talks resumed, the Rorach remained strangely quiet. General Dahl answered questions with clipped responses. He no longer pounded the table or raised his voice. Instead, he observed, and often, his eyes drifted to Mila. Ambassador. Jalen noticed the change, not just in Dahl but in the others too. The delegates who had mocked the humans earlier now listened more carefully. Their tones softened. Their accusations lost their edge. The humans had sent only one official voice, yet that one silent woman had made even the loudest species rethink their approach. By the 8th hour of negotiations, the discussion turned practical. Resource shares were split into thirds. The border systems in question were to be jointly observed by a council of mixed species, with humans included. The Rorach didn't argue. They simply nodded. Mila said nothing the entire time. Later, as the chamber emptied and the lights dimmed slightly for the evening cycle, Jalen walked over to her. His voice was low, almost cautious. "I'm not sure what happened back there," he said. "But I'm glad you were here." Mila gave him a small smile. "Just doing my job." He looked at her, studying her for a moment. "You didn't even raise your voice." "I didn't need to." She stood and gathered her things. Around them, delegates whispered in their own languages. Some pointed, some avoided her gaze. She didn't mind either reaction. Back in her quarters, Mila finally pulled out her datapad and began writing a report. She didn't mention the moment of silence. She didn't talk about the way Dahl had looked at her or how close the summit had come to collapsing. Instead, she wrote a short sentence at the end. "Threat neutralized. No force required." She turned off the lights and looked out the window. Unity Station drifted silently through space, stars burning quietly in the distance. Sometimes the loudest message is the one left unsaid. News of the incident at Unity Station spread faster than any official report. Whispers turned into retellings, and retellings turned into rumors. Across the Galactic Confederation, species who had never paid attention to human affairs suddenly asked questions. How had a human woman, unarmed, unnamed, and unnoticed, stopped an apex predator without lifting a hand or speaking a word? And more importantly, what did it mean for the way the Confederation understood humans? Back at the Interstellar Species Profiling Office, the analysts were nervous. The ISPO prided itself on its structured approach. They had built their entire system around predictable behaviors, measurable traits, and strict biological patterns. But nothing about what had happened at the summit fit their models. General Corin Dahl, a creature bred for domination, had backed down from a member of a species that didn't even rank high enough to be considered a threat. The classification board met in emergency session, staring at surveillance footage and psychological readouts with growing concern. They reviewed every detail. Mila Wren's calm posture, her steady breathing, the lack of any defensive stance. There was no display of dominance, no show of aggression. And yet, the Rorschach general had seen something in her eyes that made him stop. The analysts couldn't explain it. Their reports had always stated that humans were unpredictable, adaptable, and emotionally driven. But this wasn't emotion. It was control. It was discipline. And it didn't match any known behavior for a species considered mostly harmless. The ISPO debated for hours. Some wanted to dismiss it as an outlier, a fluke caused by individual training. Others argued that the entire system needed revision. After all, this wasn't the first time humans had surprised them. They had survived. Hostile planets won wars they shouldn't have and formed alliances faster than expected. Their success wasn't based on strength, it was based on something harder to define. In the end, the ISPO created a new category. Not quite predator, not quite prey. They called it SD1, Strategic Dominant, Level 1. The description was short and simple. Species capable of disarming threat without physical force, avoid provocation, engage with caution. It was the first new classification in over a century. Meanwhile, on Unity Station, the delegates completed their agreements with unusual ease. The Rorschach signed the treaty without complaint. General Dahl didn't speak again in public before leaving. No threats, no objections. Just silence. Some said he was ashamed. Others believed he had learned something new, something his species had never considered. Strength in their culture was always loud, always physical, but maybe they had been wrong. Mila didn't stay for the celebrations. She left before the closing ceremony, taking a quiet transport back to the human vessel that had brought her. No medals, no headlines. That wasn't her way. She submitted her final report and disappeared back into the systems that rarely showed names or faces. People like her were trained to stay invisible, and that's exactly how she liked it. Ambassador Jalen Morrow later gave an interview. When asked about the incident, he simply smiled. Mila did what she always does, he said. She watches. She understands people, and when the time comes, she acts not with weapons but with purpose. He didn't give further details. On Earth there was pride, of course, but there was also a deeper recognition, one that stretched beyond the usual, applause for intelligence or bravery. Mila's actions reminded humanity of something they often forgot. In a galaxy full of power, speed, and violence, their real strength came from something else. It came from knowing when to stay calm, from reading the moment, from understanding that the right silence could speak louder than any speech. Other species began to take notice. In later conferences, more humans were invited, not just as observers but as mediators. Their reputation shifted, not as warriors, not as engineers, but as something new, balancers, people who saw the currents beneath the surface and knew how to keep the peace when words started to fail. The Rorschach never mentioned the incident again. General Dahl returned to his homeworld and did not seek further conflict with human colonies. Those who asked him privately what had happened received no clear answers. But one thing changed. The ER. Rorschach began including human advisors in their planning sessions, not out of trust but out of caution. They no longer underestimated the quiet ones. And somewhere far from Unity Station, in a small outpost orbiting a forgotten moon, Mila sat alone. She was reviewing new intelligence, preparing for her next assignment. Her life hadn't changed. She wasn't interested in fame. What mattered to her was something else, watching the world from the edges and stepping in only when absolutely necessary. She turned off her screen and looked out into the dark. Stars blinked like old memories, each one holding its own quiet danger. But Mila wasn't afraid. She knew who she was. And now, finally, so did the galaxy. For all their power and pride, the others had missed one simple truth. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly, says nothing at all, and changes everything.